morning. We are glad that you're here. Thanks for being here. It's been good to meet some new people today, and we're glad for that. If you're here today and you have not been a part of this series, let me catch you up on what we're doing. Or if you've been here for the last 5 weeks and can't remember a thing about the series, let me catch you up. We're in the middle of a series called It's Okay Not to Be Okay. And the whole premise or the basis of this series is that there were people in the Bible that had issues in their life, and they dealt with things in their life. And God didn't say to them, I'm sorry, you're not perfect, you're out here. Just the opposite. He said, I know you're not perfect, I know that you are not okay, but that's okay, because I still have something for you to do in my kingdom and my work. And we've been looking at different people that He has seen and He's used and He's worked with. And today we're going to continue that. And we're going to look at another Old Testament character, a guy by the name of David. Yeah, David started out pretty strong in his career in the Bible, in that his first big event was that David and Goliath. He defeated that giant that no one else would stand up to. He swung that sling and took down Goliath. From there, David's fame continued to grow. He eventually became king over Israel. And under David's leadership, the children of Israel experienced more prosperity and growth, and the largest kingdom they have ever experienced as a nation. So David, you would have to say, was pretty successful in what he did. And yet David, the Bible does not hide the things that David dealt with. David was okay in a lot of ways, but there were things in his life where he wasn't okay. And we're going to look at one of those times today as we look at the life of David in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12. You see, what we find there is that David, we don't know if he became complacent. We don't know if he just got comfortable. We really don't know everything that happened. But his story starts out in chapter 11, verse 1, in this way. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rahab. But David remained in Jerusalem. Now, in and of itself, there was nothing wrong with David staying back. He had been a leader. He now had a competent army. He had competent generals. They could easily go into battle without him being there and still be victorious. But it's interesting that it's pointed out, normally as the kings go out to war, David decided to remain in Jerusalem. When he did that, he found himself, maybe for some unknown reason, kind of idle time. He had some time on his hands. We don't know all the details of the situation, but he found himself in a situation. He woke up one night, maybe couldn't sleep, and back in those days, it was common. Your patio was basically on the roof of your house. His palace had a rooftop. So he went up to that rooftop, and I doubt if David woke up that morning and thought to himself, you know what? This is the day I'm going to mess up my life. You know, what can I do today to just wreck everything I've worked for up to this point? I doubt if he woke up with that, had even a thought like that as the day went on. But as he goes up to the rooftop, and as he's wandering around, all of a sudden he looks out and he sees a beautiful woman. And this is what happens in verses 2 and following. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. And the woman is very beautiful. And David sent someone to find out about her. And the man said, isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her, for she had purified herself from her uncleanliness. And then when she went back home, the woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, I am pregnant. As you can see, what started off as a simple stroll into the night air, David ended up seeing something there that was a temptation to him. And that temptation, it was just not a fleeting glance. He seemed to dwell on that temptation, and he then began to act on that temptation and had Bathsheba brought to his place, and he slept with her that night. He sends her back home, thinks everything's okay, until one day he gets a message from Bathsheba. King David, I'm pregnant with your child. At that point, David probably panicked a little bit, thought, oh no, what's the people are going to say? Here I am the king, I'm supposed to be doing all these things right. What am I going to do? Well, he came up with a plan. And his plan involved the husband. He sent a note to the front line there to Joab and said, hey, you know Uriah the Hittite, he's in your army, send him back to me. So Joab did, and Uriah went to the palace, and David said, Uriah, tell me how things are going at the battle. So Uriah gave him a report of the battle. And David must have said, thanks, appreciate that. Now, why don't you just go back, spend some time with your wife before you go back to the battlefield. Uriah left the palace, it says, and then it says that David also sent him a gift. We don't know what the gift was, but just send him a gift. Uriah goes out of the palace gate, and he stops there. And he looks around, he sees a bunch of servants, and he beds down for the night at the gate of the palace where all the other servants of the king spent the night. Well, someone came to David the next morning and said, hey, you know Uriah? This guy must have known the plan. Well, he didn't go home. He spent the night at the gate where every one of the other servants stayed. And you can kind of anticipate David, oh, what in the world? So he summoned Uriah back and he said, Uriah, why didn't you go and be with your wife? You had this opportunity. And this was Uriah's response in verse 11. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in the tents, and my master Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open fields. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and be with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. You can almost hear David slap his head and say, great, why'd I have to get a guy like this? So loyal, he won't even go home. What in the world am I going to do? So he comes up with this plan and says, tell you what, I know, I'll invite him to dinner tonight. And that's what he did. And he got him there at the dinner, and he gave him all kinds of his fine wine, got him drunk, and said, all right, Uriah, see you later. Go back home. Well, Uriah went out the gate, and what did he do? Once again, spent the night at the gate and did not go and be with his wife. There again, David heard about it. And then you can see the plot thickens. Everything David's tried to cover up his sin is not working. His plans, and as sin so many times does, it just kind of grew and grew and grew. David came up with another plan. He wrote a letter to Joab, the commander of the army, and my guess is he gave it to Uriah to send back to Joab. This is what the letter said. Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so that he will be struck down and die. And Joab, being the good follower that he was, did exactly what David asked. The battle got heated. They got up right next to the wall, and Joab withdrew some of his men, and Uriah was killed. But there were a couple other guys killed also. So Joab sends a messenger back to the king and say, report to the king and tell him this guy and this guy got killed. And when he hears that, he's going to get really mad. But then tell him, and Uriah the Hittite also perished, and everything will be okay. So there was more than one involved in this cover-up. That's what happened. The king received the message that Uriah had passed away. They told Bathsheba she went into a period of mourning, grief for her husband. And the scripture says that after that period of mourning, David, being the nice guy that he is, did not want her to be alone or not without care, so he brought her into his household and took her as his wife. I'm wondering if David's thinking, well, people will look at me and think, what a nice guy I am. Help out this poor lady like that. But the last verse of the chapter sums it all up in this portion of the story. Verse 27 says this. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. Had displeased the Lord. You see, it's okay not to be okay, but that doesn't change the lessons that we can learn. It doesn't change what happens sometimes when we stray away. So I think the first lesson we can learn from David's story is simply this: sin is ugly. There's nothing pretty about this story. There's nothing good about what David did. He thought he was just going to go through, cover it all up. Everything was going to be fine, except it didn't turn out fine. Uriah lost his life as well as a couple other soldiers lost theirs. A woman lost her husband. Grief all around for everyone to share. But David finally had ridded himself, he thought, of the problem. Until one day, Nathan the prophet comes to him. And Nathan comes in and says, David, I got a little story I want to tell you. I want to tell you about something that happened. This is the story in 2 Samuel 12, verses 1 through 4. There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb that he had bought. And he raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man. But the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle, to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to be with him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. And when David heard this story, he was livid. He said, I can't believe that a guy that had everything would take this little lamb from this one guy, that's the only lamb he had. He said, bring this man to me, he should die. And Nathan looked at him and said, David, you are that man. And all of a sudden, the ugliness of sin came crashing down all around him. David came face to face with what he had done. Sin. It's a universal problem. Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. That means we are all up the creek without a paddle, and we're in the same boat. Romans 6:23, a couple chapters over, then tells us what the consequences of that should be. For the wages of sin is death. Sin is ugly. It's an interesting dynamic because it looks so enticing in the beginning. And yet it comes in and it brings darkness and despair. And lives are destroyed. David opened himself up to temptation. And he acted on that. And it got ugly from there on. I'm not going to give you a top 10 list of sins today and ask you to pick out which ones are yours. We're all somewhere on that list. Everyone has different areas of their life that Satan attacks them for different things. But, you know, I want to point out something that in our culture and society today is become really, I think, a noose around so many people's necks, and it's the sin that David found himself trapped in, the sexual sin. And that's the whole issue of the internet. It has become the rooftop, like David's rooftop. There's so much out there that is so readily available, pornography and meeting up with people and all this stuff, that all of us need to watch out and be careful. What do you do? There's all kinds of statistics. I could go into those, but I won't. Let me just suffice it to say, sin is ugly. And don't be fooled by its death grip. David's story shows us how ugly sin can be, because in verse 11, this is what Nathan says. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, David, I am going to bring calamity to you. And David spent the rest of his life dealing with the consequences of that sin. He had scars in his life. It impacted his family. It impacted other people's lives. Why? Because sin is ugly. And there's nothing pretty about it. But David's story goes on, and it teaches, there's a second lesson we can learn from his story as we read on in the chapter, and it's this. Sin is ugly, but forgiveness is available. This is what happens in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. And then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin, and you are not going to die. But because by doing this you have made the enemies of the Lord show their contempt, the son born to you will die. See, David repented and God forgave him. David yet bore the consequences of his sin. When that child was born and when it died, David went into deep, deep mourning and grief and despair, and he never fully recovered from all the implications of everything that was there. What did David deserve because of that? His own words proclaimed it. That man should die. It's what he deserved. Aren't you glad we don't get what we deserve? If we did, none of us would be here. Our forgiveness comes through Jesus Christ. Death on the cross. His blood was shed for us. And forgiveness is available to all who desire to partake. Let's never forget that. Let's always depend on that. Because I wish I could tell you you're going to leave today after this sermon and you're never going to sin again. Wouldn't that be great? But probably not going to happen. That's when the blood of Christ. I love Romans 5, verse 6 and 7, I believe, that says, for at just the right time, when we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You see, it's His death that makes forgiveness available. And we need to partake of that forgiveness. Well, David went on from this point in his life, and he dealt with some things, and he did some good things. He still struggled. We know this by a lot of the Psalms that he wrote. David's one of those unique characters. Not only do we read about his life, but we get an inside view of his heart. I don't know how long it was after all of this happened. I don't know what portion in David's life, but Psalm 51, David wrote, and it's about the incident with Bathsheba. And in that psalm, I'd encourage you to read the whole psalm. I'm going to read just a few verses. David basically lays it out and says, Lord, I messed up big time. Please forgive me. Do not cast me away from your presence. And in verses 10 and 11 and 12, we find these words. Where you see, restoration begins with the heart. He says, create in me a pure heart. Some versions say a clean heart, O Lord. And renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. You see, no pun intended, David literally got to the heart of the matter. He knew that there were things that were going to come up that He was going to continue to deal with. And as we go through our lives and we have sin in our lives and things we deal with, we can sometimes remove some of the external circumstances, whatever it might be that drags us down, whatever type of sin we might find ourselves being weak towards. Sometimes we can remove those external circumstances by not going here, not watching this, not seeing that, not hanging out with those people, whatever it might be. But the problem with just depending on removing the external circumstances is that they keep coming up. They keep popping back up and showing us another way to sin. So David gets to the heart of the matter by saying, Lord, create within me a pure heart. So you want to be restored. Strength must come from the inside out. And what happens when you get a pure heart? It then takes away the desires that you've had to give in to the temptations that are there. Lord, create within me a pure heart. And then that pure heart gives us the strength to look at that and say, I don't need that anymore. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. I want to read these verses again, slowly. I want you to think about them. And Robert's going to sing the first round of our decision song. And I don't want you to sing while he's singing, and he'll invite you to join. And I want the words of this song to be your prayer. And I want you, there may be some things that you need to lay at the feet of God. If so, do it. Do it. Listen to these words again. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence, or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me.
Here's my heart, Lord. Here's my heart, Lord. Here's my heart, Lord. Speak what is true, 'cause I am found. I am yours. I am loved. I'm made pure, I have life, I can breathe, I am healed, I am free. Let's stand together and sing this prayer. Here's my heart, Lord.